Okay. Right now we're at ancient.eu and we're looking at the history of the city of or Ur. Ur was a city in the region of Sumer, southern Mesopotamia, in what is modern day Iraq. According to biblical tradition, the city is named after a man who founded the first settlement there, Ur. Though this has been disputed. The city's other biblical link is to the patriarch Abraham, who left Ur to settle into the land of Canaan. This claim has also been contested by scholars who believe that Abraham's home was further north in Mesopotamia in a place called Ura, near the city of Haran, and that the writers of biblical narrative in the book of Genesis confused the two. Whatever its biblical connection may have been, Ur was a significant port city on the Persian Gulf, which began most likely as a small village in the Ubaid period of the Mesopotamian history, around 5000 to 4100 BCE, and was an established city by 3800 BCE, continually inhabited until 450 BCE. The early period in excavation. The site became famous in 1922 when Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the ruins and discovered what he called the Great Death Pit, an elaborate grave complex. The royal tombs, and more significantly to him, claimed to have found evidence of the flood described in the books of Genesis. This claim was later discredited but continues to find supporters. In its time, Ur was a city of enormous size, scope, and opulence, which drew its vast wealth from its position on the Persian Gulf and the trade this allowed with countries as far away as India. The present site of the ruins of Ur are more further inland than they were at the time the city was flourishing, owing to silting of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. One second. From the beginning, Ur was an important trade center, owing to its location at a pivotal point where the Tigris and Euphrates ran into the Persian Gulf. Archaeological excavations have substantiated that early on, Ur possessed great wealth and citizens enjoyed a level of comfort unknown in other Mesopotamian cities. As with other great urban complexes in the region, the city began as a small village which was most likely led by a priest or a priest king, the king of the first dynasty, Messenapada, Messenapada, Mesanneppada, Messenapada, is only known through the Sumerian king list and from inscriptions on artifacts found in the graves of Ur. The second dynasty is known to have had four kings, but about them, their accomplishment, or the history during this time, nothing is known. The early Mesopotamian writers did not consider it worthwhile to record the deeds of mortals and preferred to link human achievements to the work and will of gods. Ancient hero kings such as Gilgamesh, or those who performed amazing feats such as Etana, were worthy of record, but mortal kings were not afforded the same level of concern. So they're saying that um, Nephilim or demigod people were the ones they were worried about, not regular folks. The hero kings of Akkad. Here we go with this. This changed with the rise of Sargon Akkad and his Akkadian Empire, which ruled over the diverse regions of Mesopotamia between 2334 BCE to 2218 BCE. Sargon the Great claimed to have been born of a priestess and a god, floated down the river in a basket of bulrushes to be found by the servant of the king of the city Lagash, and rose from obscurity through the will of the goddess Inanna to rule over all Mesopotamia. The inscriptions he left dare those who follow him to do the deeds he did if they hope to call themselves a king, and his life was worthy of efforts of scribes of the region for centuries after his death. His grandson, Naramsin, learned well the lessons of the importance of personal propaganda, claimed he had gone further than his grandfather, and he himself defied during excuse me claimed he had gone further than his grandfather and had himself defied during his reign. No, and had himself deified during his reign. There we go. In doing so, he provided a model for those kings who followed him. Sargon the Great and Naram-Sin were the most powerful rulers in the Akkadian Empire, and once it fell, their names became legend and their deeds worth emulating. At he was of Akkad were mostly emulated by the rulers of the Third Dynasty. This period in the history of Sumer is known as the Third period, 2447 BCE to 1750 BCE, and was the age in which the city of reached its height. The great ziggurat of which can still be visited in modern times, dates from this period, as do most of the ruins of the city, and the cuneiform tablets discovered there. The two greatest kings of the Third Dynasty were Namu and his son Shugli, who created an urban community developed to cultural progress and excellence, and in doing so gave birth to what is known as the Sumerian Renaissance. One moment. Namu, Shugli, and the Sumerian Renaissance. Namu wrote down the first codified law system of the land, some 300 years before Hammurabi of Babylon wrote his, and governed his realm in accordance with the patriarchal hierarchy, in which he was the father, guiding his children to prosperity and continued health. Under Namu the Great, ziggurat was built and trade flourished. The arts and technology which the Sumerians are most famous for were all encouraged in during this time. The historian Paul Kriwazik observes that in order for such a patriarchal system of government to succeed, the people must believe that their ruler is greater, more powerful than they are, in the same way that their children regard their father. To this end, it seems Namu presented himself to his subjects in line with hero King Sargon, Naram-Sin, in order to encourage the populace to follow him in the pursuit of excellence. His son Shugli, in an effort to surpass the achievements of his father, went even further. One example of this is his famous run when, to impress the people, distinguish himself from the father. Shugli ran 100 miles between the religious center of Nippur and the capital of and back again in one day in order to officiate at the festivals in both cities. Shugli continued his father's practices, bettering them when he saw fit, and is considered the greatest king of the Third Dynasty of for the heights civilization reached under his reign. Among his many building projects was a wall which ran 155 miles along the border of the region of Sumer to keep out the barbarian tribes known as the Martu, also as the Titnim, who are most recognizable to modern leaders as the biblical designation as the Amorites. Shugli's wall was maintained by his son and grandson and great-grandson, who could not hold back the tribes on the borders. The wall was too long to be properly manned, and since it was not anchored at either end, invaders could pass by the obstacle by simply marching around it. In 1750 BCE, the neighboring kingdom of Elam breached the wall and sacked and carried away the last king as prisoner. The Amorites, who had already found their way around the wall, merged with the Sumerian populace, and in this way, Sumerian culture came to an end with the fall of the declination of and excavation. In the Old Babylonian period, 2000 to 1600 BCE, remained a city of importance and was considered a center of learning and culture. According to the historian Gwendolyn Leake, the heirs of the kings of Isin and Larsa, were keen to show their respect to the gods of by preparing the devastated temples, and the Kassite kings, who later conquered the region, did the same as would the Assyrian rulers who followed them. The city continued to be inhabited through the early part of the Achaemenid period, 550 BC to 330 BC. But due to climate change and overuse of the land, more and more people migrated to the northern regions of Mesopotamia and toward the southern land of Canaan. The patriarch Abraham, some claim, among them, as previously noted. Slowly dwindled in importance as the Persian Gulf receded further and further from the city and eventually fell into ruin around 450 BC. The area was buried under sand until it was visited by Pietro della Velle in 1625 Common Era, who noted strange inscriptions on brick, later identified as cuneiform script, and images and artifacts which were later recognized as cylinder seals used to identify property or sign letters. In 1853 to 1854 Common Era, the first excavation of the site was made by John George Taylor, in the interest of British Museum, who noted multiple grave complexes and concluded the site may have been a Babylonian necropolis. The definitive excavation of the ruins of Ur was conducted between 1922 and 1934 by Sir Leonard Woolley, working on behalf of the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania. The famous tomb of Tutankhamun have been discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, and Woolley was hoping for an equally impressive find. At Ur, he uncovered the graves of 16 kings and queens, including that of Queen Pwabli, also known as Shubad, and her treasures. The Great Death Pit, as Woolley named it, was the largest of those uncovered, and in it, Woolley found 6 armed guards and 68 servant women. They wore ribbons of gold and silver in their hair, except one woman who still had in her hand a coiled up silver ribbon. She was unable to fasten them before the sleeping potion took hold that painlessly carried her away to the afterworld with her master Bertman. With her master. Woolley also uncovered the royal standard of Ur, which celebrated the city's triumph over her enemies in war and festivities which the people enjoyed in peace. In an effort to outdo Carter's triumph and the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, Woolley claimed that he found evidence of Ur of the biblical flood, but notes taken by his assistant Max Mollerman later showed that the flood record at the site was in no way supported a worldwide deluge and was more like in keeping in regular flooding caused by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Further excavations at Ur since Woolley's time have corroborated Malawan's notes, and in spite of persistent belief to contrary, no evidence supporting the flood from the Bible has been found at Ur, nor anyone else in Mesopotamia. So that's the end of that article. We're going to get back to it here in a moment. This is going to take a long time, y'all. I mean, a long time. Okay, now we're at the Haaretz.com. And we're going to read, were Hebrews ever slaves in Egypt? Now, the importance of this website is that this is a website that is proctored and monitored by the people of Israel. These are for Israeli people. So if you were to look this up, it's not for regular Americans. So the information in this is not skewed for American people. Do you understand that? So anything I read to you is based on their actual understanding. Here we go. Ancient Egypt had intimate relations with Canaan, and most of the Semitic people migrating there would have been Canaanite, but not all. One moment. Every Passover, Jews retell the story of Hebrews' fight from slavery in Egypt and their miraculous escape across the Red Sea, giving birth to the nation of Israel. The full story has also been retold by Hollywood time and again, shaping the modern generation understanding of Israelites' bondage in Egypt. But if ancient Egypt slaves, the region known today as Israel, were they really Israelites? There is no direct evidence that the people worshiping Yahweh surged in ancient Egypt, let alone during the time the Exodus is believed to have happened. There is indirect that at least some did. What's for sure is that thousands of years ago, Egypt was crawling with Semitic-speaking people. Canaanites ascended. Throughout antiquity, Egypt was known as the breadbasket of the world. The annual flooding of the Nile produced rich harvests, and when famine hit neighboring lands, starving peoples often made their way to the fruitful soils of Egypt. The archaeological record shows that at least some of the people were of Semitic origin, coming from Canaan specifically and the Levant in general. In fact, histories of both Egypt, Upper Kingdom, and the Lower Kingdom, and Canaan were intimately tied together. Starting over 4,000 years ago, Semites began crossing the deserts from Palestine into Egypt. The tomb of the high priest Kunhotep II of the 20th century BCE even shows a scene of Semitic traders bringing offerings to the dead. Some of the Semites came to Egypt as traders and immigrants. Others were prisoners of war, and yet others were sold into slavery by their own people. A papyrus mention of Egyptian a papyrus mentions a wealthy Egyptian lord whose 77 slaves included 48 Semitic origin. One moment. In fact, by the late Middle Kingdom era, around 3,700 years ago, Canaanites had actually achieved absolute power in the form of line of Canaanite pharaohs ruling the lower kingdom, coexisting with the Egyptian-ruled upper kingdom. One moment. This is in parentheses. These Canaanite pharaohs include the mysterious Shakub, whose existence is attested by 27 scarabs found in Egypt, Canaan, and Nubia, and a famous one at Shikhamona by Haifa. The biblical tradition of the patriarch Jacob settling in Egypt could well derive from this time. One moment. The Hyksos, the coming of the Hyksos. In time, the Canaanite leaders were themselves ousted by the Hyksos, a mysterious group who settled in Egypt sometime before 1650 BCE, and who came to rule the lower kingdom from the city of Avaris. Now, I want y'all to hear something. 1650 BCE is almost 3,700 years ago. Do y'all understand that? Do y'all understand that? That's a play on words, but I'm not even going to get into that. And the Hyksos are believed to have come there around 1789 BC, something like that. So that's almost 100 years off. Anyway, some scholars believe the Semitic traders shown in the mural on Kumhotep's tomb are actually Hyksos. Under the Hyksos wing, the Canaanite population in the Delta grew and waxed stronger, as shown by finding in ancient Avaris. The Canaanite presence is attested by pottery that was Canaanite in form and chemically derived from Palestine. The dominant religious burial practices in Avaris at the time were also Canaanite. Eventually, the Hyksos, in their turn, would be vanquished after a 30-year blood feud with the king of Thebes, led by Ahmose I, 1539 BCE to 1514 BCE. Prevailed in capturing Avaris and uniting the lower and upper kingdoms into a single polity, the United Kingdom. The Hyksos were driven out of Egypt through Sinai into southern Canaan. The Roman-era Jewish historian Josephus, for one, identifies the Hyksos with the Israelites. He cites the 3rd century Egyptian scribe and priest Manetho, who wrote after the expulsion, the Hyksos wandered the desert before establishing Jerusalem. Some scholars suspect that Exodus is based on the distant Semitic memories of the expulsion of Exodus. Others are dubious about Manetho's history, which was penned centuries after the actual event. But it's okay for them to say that what they're saying is more accurate and they're thousands of years displaced. How they do that, I don't know. Also, the Hyksos were expelled monarchs of Egypt, not slaves. Ultimately, they are not very likely source of the Hadaga story. Yet another school thinks Exodus happened hundreds of years later during the time of the New Kingdom, and some suspect there were multiple expulsions and events that merged over the millennia into the Passover story. Enslaved by war. Ahmose not only expelled the Hyksos, he united ancient Egypt and began the process of expanding its empire to stretch over Canaan and Assyria too. Egyptian scribe Ahmose I and Tutmosis III wrote boastfully of the campaigns in the Levant, resulting in the captured prisoners being enslaved in Egypt. Various descriptions perfectly match scenes in the Passover Haggadah. Excuse me. The setting describes in Exodus could be Egypt's East Delta, where the Nile floods every year. The area has no source of stone and mud brick structures repeatedly melted back into mud and silt. Even stone temples have hardly survived here. Physical evidence of slaves working there isn't likely to have survived. What? Let me repeat that. Physical evidence of slaves working there is not likely to have survived. They're saying because the bricks melted back into damn mud. Because they didn't hew them with straw. Remember, they just made them out of freaking damn mud. Anyway. But a leather scroll dating to the time of Ramses II describes a close account of brick making, apparently by enslaved prisoners of wars in Canaan and Syria, which sounds very much like the biblical account described, but 1303 to 1213 BC goes against the time period wherein which they tell you that the Exodus takes place within the Bible. Right on, right on. The scribe describes 40 taskmasters, each with a daily target of 2,000 bricks. And listen, and it says to see Exodus chapter 5, verse 6, for the sake of argument. I'm going to go there within the Schofield Reference Bible, and I'm going to show you how their timeline just within this Bible. So I'm just trying to show y'all that all these people are lying to us. All these people are lying to us. Every last single one of them. I'm in Exodus chapter 5. The only time period you have for there's only 3 different time periods in the book of the Exodus. It starts at 1706 BC. Then it goes to 1702, 1689 BC. No, I lied. 1706 to 1635 to 1531. Those are time periods I was giving you out of the last books of Genesis, Then it goes to 1491. You don't get out of 1491 until you get to the book of Joshua. I mean, the book of the Leviticus. No, that's right. That's right. I want to say the book of Leviticus is even like that for the most part. Yeah, so until you get to the very end of the book of Leviticus, and then you get to the book of Numbers, and then you start to kind of break off into Deuteronomy, the time periods start to change. And even then, the time periods, it's only a 40-year period, supposedly. I mean, the man tried to match the 40 years in the wilderness so closely that he made his own writings erroneous as far as the historical time periods related to the time periods that he's trying to monitor. However, we're going to get back to this article. The tomb of Vizier Reckmeyer, 1450 BCE, famously shows foreign slaves making bricks for the workshop store place. One moment. The temple, they are labeled, captured, brought off by His Majesty for the work of the temple of Amun. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say something. These dudes that you're going to see, that I'm going to show you in these pictures, don't look nothing like no Hebrews, nor do they look like Hyksos. They look nothing like my people at all. At all. They're probably Ethiopians and Nubians and of the sort. One moment. Also, biblical descriptions of how Hebrew slaves suffered under the lash borne out in Egypt, Papyrus Bolono 1094, telling how 2 workers fled their taskmaster because he beat them. So it seems descriptions of Egyptian slavery are accurate. Clues to Israelite presence in Egypt. Conclusively, Semitic slaves there were. However, critics argue that there were no archaeological evidence of Semitic tribes worshiping Yahweh in Egypt. Yahweh is not the name of the Hebrew God. That is the name of the Canaanite pantheon God. Not only have I had a brother make this clear to me through his own researches, but I've looked this up, and I cannot tell y'all enough, that is not the name of the Hebrew God. Anyhow, we will keep moving. Because of the muddy conditions in the East Delta, almost no pottery have survived. But those that did may provide further clues in the search for lost Israelites. The papyrus Anatasi the Sixth, from around 3,200 years ago, describes how the Egyptian authorities allowed a group of Semitic nomads from Edom who worship Yahweh to pass the border fortress into the region of Jeku and proceed with their livestock to the lakes of Pithom. That sounds like my man Esau and his children, or, the Edomites. One moment. Shortly afterward, the Israelites enter world history with the Merenphostel, which bears the first mention of an entity called Israel in Canaan. It is robustly dated at 1210 BCE, i.e. as of writings 33,226 years ago. These Yahweh worshippers were in ancient Egypt well after the Exodus is supposed to have happened. That's because they are Edomites. Members of the Yahweh cult may have existed there earlier, but there is no solid evidence of this. Thank you for my man Scribe. According to the scribe Manetho, the founder of the monotheism was not Os- Osopharis, Osiris, who later adopted the name Moses, and led his followers out of Egypt in Akhenaten's reign. Akhenaten was the heretic pharaoh who abolished polytheism and replaced it with monotheism, worshipping only the sun disk. Aten, 1987, a team of French archaeologists discovered the tomb of a man named Apira, his name is spelled both ways in Egyptian inscriptions. Commander of the charioteers and vizier to Amenhotep II, and to his son Akhenaten. The vizier's name ending in El or El, could be related to the Hebraic god Elohim. That's not a god, though. Once again, I can't even break all this stuff down to you right now. And ending in the Apira IA could have been indicative of the Yah, short for Yahweh. This interpretation supports the argument that Hebrews were present in the Egyptian during the 18th dynasty during the 3,600 years ago. I'm not even going to go into this right here and get too carried away. One second. They're saying if around 2 million people left Egypt, when the entire population would have been estimated around 3 to 4.5 million, it would have been noticed and it would have resounded in Egyptian records. Note that Herodotus claims that 1 million Persians invaded Greece in 480 BC. Those numbers were undoubtedly exaggerated, as in most ancient records, but nobody claims the invasion of Greece never happened. Anyway, one second. So these guys are trying to actually. So let me read something to you about this article, because they're trying to discredit the number of people that we're reading in the book, that they're saying that all these people weren't being killed back then. Once again, this is the work of a Jew boy, so you can't be surprised that they're trying to make light of the situation. One moment. The absence of evidence of a sojourn in the wilderness proves nothing. A Semitic group in flight wouldn't have left direct evidence. They would have not built cities, built monuments, nor done anything but left footprints in the desert sand. That's what they're saying. Rivers of blood and portraits devastated Egypt, haunted by plagues, droughts, blah, 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 blah. We're not even going to worry about that. Also, Egyptians were not above altering historical records when the truth proved to be embarrassing or went against their political interests. It was not the prestige of the pharaohs to advertise their failures on temple walls for all to see. When Tutmosis III came to power, he tried to obliterate the memory of his predecessor. Her inscriptions were erased, her obelisks surrounded by a wall, her monuments were forgotten, her name does not appear in later annals. And this is Hatshepsut. Anyhow, this right here is just trying to prove to you that there were Semitic people who were coming and living into the land that you guys call Egypt. And once again, I'm not talking about the Hyksos right now. I'm just talking about Semitic people. Here we go. The expulsion of the Hyksos all the way through. After the conclusion of the treaty that left us with their families and chattels, not fewer than 240,000 men crossed the desert into Syria. Fearing the Assyrians, who dominated over Asia at the time, they built a city in the country which we now call Judea. It was large enough to contain this great number of men and was called Jerusalem. Josephus against Apion, quoting Manethos. Okay, so this is what I'm at right now with y'all. Keep all that in mind. Please keep all that in mind. And I know most of the people ain't going to have made it this far, so that's not a big deal. In the second intermediate period, 18th through 16th centuries BCE, towards the end of the Middle Bronze Age, the West Asian Canaanite, Hyksos, controlled lower or northern Egypt. In the 16th century, Ahmose I overthrew the Hyksos and initiated the 18th dynasty, the new kingdom of Egypt. Recent archaeological discoveries at Tel Hubawa, also known as Tel Habua or Tel Huba, a site associated with ancient Jaru or Taro, shed new light on Ahmose's campaign. A daybook entry in the famous Rhine mathematical papyrus notes the Ahmose's control of Jaru before laying siege to Hyksos at their capital in Avaris. Excavations at the site, located 2 miles east of the Suzel Canal, have discovered evidence of battle wounds on skeletons discovered in 2-story administration structures dating to the Hyksos and New Kingdom occupations. The site showed evidence of burned building, as well as massive New Kingdom grain silos that would have been able to feed large number of Egyptian troops. After Ahmose took the city and defeated the Hyksos, he expanded the town and built several nearby forts to protect Egypt's eastern border. Jaru was the first discovered in 2003, but until now the excavation only uncovered the new military fort and silos. This new discovery confirms a decisive moment in the expulsion of the history in the Hyksos, in the expulsion of the Hyksos, previously known from textile sources. Josephus identifies the Israel exodus with the expulsion of Hyksos shepherd kings. And there's more to read on that at some kind of link. Don't worry, all these links to all this stuff is going to be in the description box. The Hyksos are well known from ancient texts, and their expulsion was recorded in later ancient Egyptian historical narratives. The 3rd century BCE historian Manetho, whose semi-accurate histories stand out as valuable resources from cataloging Egyptian kingship, wrote of the Hyksos' violent entry into Egypt from the north and founding of their monumental capital at Avaris, a city associated with the famous excavations at Tel El Adaba. After the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt, Manetho reports that they wandered the desert before establishing the city of Jerusalem. While Josephus cites Manetho's history associating the Israelites with Hyksos, many modern scholars see the problems with Manetho's conflation of the expulsion of the Hyksos and the biblical narrative. Manetho lived many centuries after these events took place, and he may have combined 2 different narratives, wittingly or unwittingly, when associating the Hyksos and the Israelites. Ahmose's defeat of the Hyksos occurred centuries before the traditional date of the Exodus. In addition, the basic premise of the Hyksos and Exodus differs. Histories differ. The Hyksos were expelled rulers of Egypt, not slaves, and they were forced out, not pursued. One moment. Now let me go ahead and read something to you again, so that way y'all don't get this all messed up. It said that the Hyksos came into power around 18 to 16 BCE, right on. And then it says that old boy Ahmose I kicked them out in the 16th century BCE. Now, the importance to this right here, right, is because they say around 1489 to 1469. Now, if I tell you that the Exodus, they claim it took place in 1491 BCE, is my man still way out of his way now? Right. Moreover, let's just keep on reading. The expulsion of the Hyksos may not have been a single event, and many still read Manetho's text on the Hyksos expulsion as a record of Israelite exodus. After the Hyksos were defeated by Ahmose, some Hyksos likely remained in Egypt, perhaps as a subjugated class. The Egyptian queen Hatshepsut, 1489 to 1469 BCE, recorded the banishment of a group of Asiatics from Avaris, the former Hyksos capital. While the second expulsion would have still been centuries before the traditional date of the Exodus, there may exist parallels between these events and the Exodus narratives or earlier biblical accounts of Abraham, Sarah, and Lot's own expulsion from Egypt in Genesis 12 and 19. But them getting kicked out of the dates wouldn't line up. Right on? The dates wouldn't line up. The dates would not line up for the dates wouldn't line up, and neither would the narratives for Abraham and his wife. What I'm going to read to you is one more thing. This is about Jacob. And just so that way, can't none of y'all ever try to say that Jacob didn't get down. Jacob got down, baby. When I say he got down, Jacob got down. One moment. And I'm reading out of the Schofield reference. I'm not going to go to my Septuagint because it all pretty much reads the same. Genesis 48. We're going to start at verse 21. And Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again into the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite, with my sword and with my bow. So with that said, the sword and the bow that the Hyksos people supposedly used on these peoples, and the chariot as such, one can propose that, well, maybe these people that lived in Canaan or Canaan are a little more related to my man's Joseph and his ancestors and his brethren than people would like to think. Ishmael was a Hebrew. Esau was a Hebrew. Isaac was a Hebrew, even though he only had 2 sons. I have to bring this up to you. Lot was a Hebrew who was Shemitic. His children are Shemitic dominant. Moab and Ammon, because they're born through his daughters. So, with that said, these Hebrew people, or Semitic people, excuse me, these Semitic people, Semitic speaking people, who could they have been, is all I want you to ask yourself. May the Most High, YHWH, and all the rest of the letters, bless those that deserve to be blessed, and curse those that deserve to be cursed.